When a YouTube channel gains a subscriber, the channel owner is notified of who the new subscriber is. Whenever I get one, I like to go to the channel and see what sort of videos they have put up. I was pretty shocked recently, shocked and appalled to learn that a neo-Nazi group had subscribed to my channel. I suspect that it's because of the Indo-European videos. I really don't want to be at all useful to such a group. I'm surprised that I would be interesting to them. So I thought I'd make this video to discuss the question of whether there is any sort of racism involved in Indo-European studies. So the question we have to ask is Indo-European a race? The simple answer is no. Indo-European is a linguistic term that refers to a group of languages and to their speakers. It doesn't refer to anything regarding any sort of genetic grouping or any clumping of genes among them. For instance, in the United States, African Americans generally speak English. Since English is an Indo-European language, even though their ancestors came from Africa, African Americans are Indo-Europeans. Conversely, the descendants of the Indo-European Tocharians from Western China today speak Turkic languages, which makes them non-Indo-Europeans. So if Indo-European is not a racial term, what about Proto-Indo-Europeans? Well, the term is a little more complicated because it can refer to both a language and a culture. Linguistically, Proto-Indo-European is simply the language that the various Indo-European languages are descended from. It could have been spoken by a group of differing cultures that simply shared a language as some sort of lingua franca. It could even have been a Creole made from different languages combining. Even if it was its own particular language, that doesn't mean that it was connected with any sorts of genes, because the cultures that immediately surrounded it would almost certainly be genetically related to them. Culturally, the term can refer to the culture of those who spoke Proto-Indo-European. Again, we have the problem of whether the Proto-Indo-Europeans were a single cultural group or whether they were a group of cultures that lived near to each other. I think that we can reconstruct a Proto-Indo-European culture pretty well, but it's possible even that that culture that we reconstruct isn't that of a particular grouping, but that of the common elements of a small number of groupings. Either way, that doesn't make them racial because it doesn't involve the genetics. If we assume for the moment that the speakers of Proto-Indo-European shared some sort of genetic components that would qualify them as something like a race, even though that term has been rejected by biology, then we would at least have to realize that when they moved to other areas, they interbred with the people they moved among, to the extent, for instance, that when the Romans invaded France, even though they imposed on them the Indo-European language of Latin, which was just replacing another Indo-European language that the Gauls already spoke, they genetically, the modern French are related to the Gauls, not to the Romans. Same thing happened in England, where the Anglo-Saxons imposed the English language, but modern British are more related to Celts than they are to Germanic peoples. So there's no relationship whatsoever between genes and language. And since that's the case, there can be no relationship between race and either Indo-European or Proto-Indo-European. Those who think differently and think that the Indo-Europeans are somehow a racial grouping can only do this either from ignorance or from a deliberate desire to believe something that isn't true. If they're ignorant because they just haven't studied the matter, well, then they can go to my pages on Proto-Indo-European culture, and on Proto-Indo-European language, and educate themselves. If they're ignorant because they choose to avoid reading books that might disagree with what they believe, I really don't know what can be done with them. In general, though, those who believe such things are simply trying to compensate for low self-esteem by choosing a grouping which they can identify with and assuming that that grouping is superior to all other groupings. They raise their own self-esteem by denigrating others. This pathetic lack of self-esteem is just something that amazes me, and it frustrates me that those who get involved in it somehow often misinterpret Indo-European studies as supporting their despicable creed. So for those of you out there who might believe in some sort of racial view of Indo-Europeans, know then that you are wrong. And you are wrong not only intellectually and from a scholarly point of view, but you are wrong from a moral point of view. Thank you.